Rosa Rodriguez sides with this week's assignment, Disaster Science and Pop Culture. I chose to view the film San Andreas because I've always been interested in the possibility of Phoenix becoming a coastal city, and I can't say no to a movie with a rock in it. This movie takes on an incredible earthquake scenario in which a pair of scientists posit that they can predict earthquakes. They come upon a seismic situation in Falco, Nevada, in which they can test their theory. They make the prediction that the earthquake they just experienced in Nevada is connected to the San Andreas Fault, and California should get ready to experience the largest earthquake in U.S. history. This movie focuses mainly on the work of two doctors in the seismology department at the California Institute of Technology. Dr. Ken Park is a young man, Asian, technology-savvy, and laid-back. Then there's Dr. Lawrence Hayes. He's an older, uptight, balding Caucasian man with glasses. This characterization of scientists doesn't pan out with the statistics. If you look at the number of U.S. geoscience degrees by gender, you would find that the percentage of women seeking out their doctorate in geosciences is about 43.5%. In the movie, the only woman appearing as a geoscience professional is the intern. Ironically, if you Google women seismologists, what surfaces are two of the most renowned seismologists at Caltech, and perhaps in the world, are women, Dr. Kate Hutton and Dr. Lucy Jones. One of the concepts in the movie that I believe to be thought-provoking was the prediction of earthquakes. We can make predictions within hundreds of years or in the minuscule spans of time between S&P waves, but not within days or hours, which would be optimal. That's the reason we rely so heavily on prevention and mitigation. In the movie, the theory is that if the magnetic pulses in the Earth's magnetic field increase, then they can predict the onset of an earthquake. There are at least two scientists in real life who have separately theorized something similar. However, neither has proved their preliminary research definitively. The documentary I chose to watch was a series called The Whistle, Are We Ready for the Big One? It's a 4-episode series focused on whether or not California is ready for an earthquake of great magnitude. It takes a well-rounded look at what could happen if a large magnitude earthquake occurred in California. The two scientists featured were Dr. Lucy Jones, the author of The Big Ones, and Dr. Greg Wilkerson of the Bureau of Land Management. Dr. Lucy Jones is one of the scientists featured in the first episode of the documentary. She has a PhD in geophysics from MIT and has been a research associate at Caltech since the 1980s and worked with the USGS for over 3 decades. She's an author, an extremely knowledgeable seismologist, and since 2016 she's hosted a podcast focused on disasters and risk reduction. Not quite what I expected from a stuffy scientist. From the perspective of the moviegoer, it's not known if there's been any formulation, testing, and/or modification of a hypothesis. We don't get the benefit of knowing to what extent they did any systematic observation or experimentation. We get to see them taking measurements with instruments that just seem theatrical. The scientists in the documentary mentioned having recorded seismic activity for decades, in some cases having first-hand experience of the earthquakes and the destruction they've caused. These contrasting views make me more confident about what science looks like in real life. There are 2 instances which contrasted with real life. Tsunamis can be caused by mid-ocean earthquakes, volcanoes, erosion, and even fallen meteorites, all of them because of the displacement of water. A tsunami caused by an earthquake is usually located at or near a subduction zone. Even though this earthquake occurred near the coast, a tsunami would not have happened. There wouldn't be sufficient water displacement. If it managed to create waves at all, it definitely wouldn't be like the computer-generated images in the movie. The other thing I found peculiar is how they seem to portray what a strike-slip fault like San Andreas looks like in real life. There's one camera shot they use of a highway that's torn in half, and it creates a large chasm that ends up being impassable even by a vehicle. The 7.1 earthquake in Ridgecrest, California was large enough to be seen from space, and on the ground it looked more like this. After watching a movie and a documentary on earthquakes, my opinion of geology has changed. It's become clear to me that the science of geology is much more complex than I thought. Geology, and more specifically seismology, was oversimplified to produce a movie that would appeal to the sensationalism that modern moviegoers have come to expect. Without understanding what differentiates a hazard from a catastrophe, one could conclude that the only way to get to such a catastrophic level is to have an earthquake with a magnitude of 9.0, and that is far from the truth. From now on, I think I may see movies that have a scientific foundation with a far more critical eye.